Hi, and welcome to this course, Case Studies in Prompt Engineering. My name is Janani Ravi, and I'll be your instructor for this course. Data generation prompts instruct language models to generate synthetic data, useful for creating datasets. Code generation prompts are used to produce code snippets or entire programs, aiding developers in coding tasks. Zero shot prompts challenge models to respond to unfamiliar tasks relying on their general knowledge. Few short prompts provide limited context to guide models in addressing specific tasks, enhancing their adaptability. You'll start this course by generating data using prompts. You learn how to use data generation prompts, noting that you can request data in any format, even embedded within SQL queries for easy insertion into SQL tables. Next, you'll explore how to use code generation prompts. Generative AI tools are remarkably capable of writing code for a wide ranging set of scenarios. You'll see how you can use starter code prompts. You'll learn to convert code from one language to another, as well as how to prompt models to explain a piece of code. You'll leverage generative AI to debug your code and generate complex bits of code with step by step instructions. Finally, you'll explore techniques to improve prompt performance. A standalone prompt without any prior context is known as a zero shot prompt. However, if you give your model a few examples of the kind of results you want the model to produce, it'll use those examples as training data and give you better model responses. This is known as few shot prompting. In addition, you learn how to use chain of thought prompting and augmented knowledge prompting for better results with the model. This course will provide you with a good understanding of a variety of prompting techniques that you can use with generative AI models, allowing you to improve the model's performance on your queries. Next, we'll turn our attention to another prompt engineering technique, prompt engineering for data generation. Now, I don't know about you, but sometimes when I'm presenting scenarios or maybe I'm explaining something to somebody, I often need fake data that I can play around with. And usually I come up with this data myself. And that's pretty hard because you want data with a number of attributes, characteristics, and especially if you need data that you want to code with. Generating fake data on your own can be quite tedious. Well, I no longer have to deal with that tedium. I can turn to chatbots to help me. I can turn to generative AI. Here, when I say data generation, I explicitly mean data in the form of records. The records can be in any format, but it's actually data that you can play around with for different use cases. Now, I'm using OpenAI Playground for this demo. For a little variety, I keep moving back and forth between the different generative AI technologies to show you that all of these prompt engineering techniques work the same across platforms. Before I use prompts to generate data, let me adjust the maximum length for the response. I've set it to 533 tokens so that I can generate larger amounts of data. Now, hypothetically, let's assume that I'm setting up some kind of fictitious scenario and I need some names. So I specify to my GPT 3.5 model, I need some names for men, women, companies, and designations. For my fictitious scenario, please can you come up with 5 examples of each kind of name? I haven't specified any format in which I want the data. I just want all of the names for these different entities. And let's see what GPT 3.5 generates for me. Here are the names for men, and if you scroll down, you'll see the names for women, 5 of them. If you scroll further down, you see names for companies, quantum solutions, and so on, and then some designations. Now, this is great, but this isn't exactly what I'm looking for. My target audience is much more international, so I want some diversity in the names. And accordingly, I follow up and refine my prompt. Can you make these names more diverse so the individuals are from different countries of origin? And you can see that GPT 3.5 does exactly that. It's picked a few different countries: Pakistan, Mexico, India, Saudi Arabia, and generated names for men. And it's picked different countries: China, Colombia, and so on, and generated names for women. And then it has generated company names and designations as well. No real diversity needed there. Now, you might need data for some kind of data analysis that you're performing using a programming language. And here is how you tailor your prompt to generate such data. I need 20 records. They should be customers of a bank. They've applied for a loan. For each customer, I specify the information that I'm looking for: name, age, and gender. And gender should be male, female, or other. And then income, designation, how long the customer has been with the bank, and the amount of the loan. And also, I want this data in the JSON format. So I'm very specific in the details that I'm looking for. And you can see that I have 20 customer records that meet my use case. Now, the maximum token length that we had specified wasn't sufficient to get the complete response. So you can see that the model just stopped generating at the point the response length was reached. Generative AI can help you with different kinds of data. Here is another different example. I want the model to generate 10 sentences, 6 of which are positive, 2 are negative, and 2 are neutral. And these should be reviews of a restaurant, and also a fine dining restaurant at that. Let's see what the model comes up with now. And really, I was very pleasantly surprised and amazed by the response. The first 6 reviews were all positive. You can see the sixth one here, it's a positive review. The seventh and eighth review were both negative, and the ninth and 10th review were both neutral, mere reviews. You can also be very specific about the statistical characteristics of the generated data and the range of values within which certain fields should be generated. Here, I need height and weight data for students in a class for a linear regression problem, so I give it a lot of context. The students are between 10 and 12 years old. The average height should be 140 centimeters. The average weight should be 38 kgs. Please generate student name, height, and weight data for 20 students, and please format this in the CSV format. Notice that I have all of these statistical characteristics I want from the data. Average height 140 centimeters, average weight 38 kgs, and of course the output format. And this is what the generated data looks like. And really, the model has been very true to what I have specified. You can see that the heights and weights are distributed around 140 centimeters and 38 kgs respectively. You can also tweak this prompt further. I want both the first names and the last names for the students for my dataset, and you can see that it generates similar data, but this time now with both first name as well as last name. Let's look at one last example where we get some different data in a different format. The difference comes from the context that I've set. I need data to populate a relational database. 2 tables, employees and departments, and for each table, I've specified the fields down here at the bottom. Since this is data for a SQL database, I've also specified a constraint. Every employee should belong to a department, but every department need not have employees. Let's see if it can generate data within these constraints. And you can see the results are exactly what we want them to be. Here are the employees, and here are the departments. Every employee belongs to a department, and in this particular data set, every department also has employees, though that need not have been the case. Remember, we said every department need not have employees. In this demo, I'm back to our old generative AI friend, ChatGPT. I'm going to close the left sidebar so that we have more room for our queries and to view the results. Now, with this done, let's talk about the prompt engineering technique that we'll work with in this demo, code generation. Now, if you're a software developer, a programmer, a SQL analyst, well, you've likely used ChatGPT or some other generative AI tool to generate your code and queries. Well, ChatGPT and other technologies are just amazing at that, and they do really well. What I found is that for advanced use cases, for arcane technologies where there are not very many examples on the web, code generation might not be great. But for the basic stuff, for the straightforward stuff, the generative AI tools are really very useful and very good. Let's look at some different kinds of prompts you can use to work with code. Now, here is the most simple, straightforward one. You simply ask in plain English with a little context what code you want. What's the code that I can use in Python to open and read a file line by line? And ChatGPT gives me a very accurate answer. It uses the open command to open the file in the read mode, iterates over the file line by line, and prints out each line. And if you scroll down to the bottom, you'll find an explanation for this code as well. So it's not just the code, but you also get the explanation. This was a rather general prompt. You can get more specific with your prompts as well. How do I read a CSV file using the pandas library? Very, very specific. And really, when you're working, these are the kinds of prompts you're more likely to use. ChatGPT gives me the response step by step, starting with the import statement that I need to use. Then it talks about how I can read the data, print out the first few records in the data. I have all of the instructions as well, along with the code. And here is the complete example at the very bottom. ChatGPT is a polyglot as far as programming languages are concerned. So it's not just code generation in Python, you can have it generate code in other languages as well. Here, I want to know how I can check for duplicates in a list, but in the Java programming language, and it generates perfect Java code for me. I don't know if you guys have programmed in Java, but you can see that ChatGPT has adopted the style for Java programs as well. Notice the names of the variables has duplicates in the camel case. That's how we write code in Java. And here is the explanation as well at the very bottom. Sometimes your model will give you a single response for your code generation prompt. Sometimes it can give you multiple responses. Here I asked GPT 3.5 the same question. How do I check for duplicates in a list in Java? In the response, it specifies multiple ways I can accomplish this. The first is using sets, and then the entire example is about using sets. The second is using nested loops, and you can see the example uses nested loops as well. And there is a third method here using Java 8 streams. So sometimes you may get a more detailed response with many options to accomplish the same task. To have the code generated be more tailored to your needs rather than just generic code that you can then change and tweak, you can ask a more specific query. Specific prompts always generate more useful responses, unless, of course, you're ideating. How do I make a GET request to this URL? And I specify the URL there. And I want to retrieve data using the Python request library. And really, if you're using the code in your project, you want to be as specific as possible. Specific always gives you a more relevant response. ChatGPT is really systematic in its response, starting with the installation of the request library and then the actual code. Observe that it uses the URL that you specified as well, which means you need to do very little editing to actually use this code in your project. And of course, you get the explanation at the end. So far, we've been specifying our code generation prompts in English, but you can also use comments to generate code. Here is a comment using hash. Request the user to provide their name and city and greet them. Now, hash is used for comments in the Python language, and ChatGPT actually figures this out and generates code in Python. I did not indicate that I wanted code in Python, but I used a Python comment for code generation. ChatGPT interpreted this and correctly generated the code in Python. Now, just a heads up, this may not always work. Of the few times that I tried this, there was one time that I did not get the result in Python. So this isn't perfect, but it works most of the time. Here is another code generation comment, the double forward slash, request the user to provide their name and city and greet them. And you can see that ChatGPT now generates code using Java. And I have to say, this is pretty cool. I no longer need to give long verbose prompts. I just specify my prompt using the commenting technique of the language in which I want the code. One thing to always keep in mind when you're using these different prompting techniques is that the output of the model is probabilistic and not deterministic. Here is the same prompt as before. I've used the double forward slash to specify that this is a comment, then I request the user to provide the name and city and greet them. But this time, the code that's generated is in JavaScript and not Java. JavaScript also uses the double forward slash for comments, and this particular model at this point in time interpreted this comment to be a JavaScript comment and not a Java comment. So, really, this won't work perfectly. A reliable way to generate code in the right programming language is to use the commenting technique, but use the comment to also specify the language in which you want the code to be generated. So here I can avoid saying things like generate code in Java. I simply say double forward slash Java, that's a comment, and then double forward slash, and then what kind of code I am looking for. There is no ambiguity here about the language in which I want my code, and you can see that the code was generated using Java. Now, C Sharp uses the same commenting style as Java, the double forward slash, Here I request ChatGPT to generate the same code, but this time in C Sharp. This is actually my preferred technique for generating code. Specify the language and the request and use comments. It's been many years since I wrote C Sharp, but when I look at this code, it seems correct to me. ChatGPT is conversant with many programming languages and it's proficient in many programming languages. Here is the same code, but this time I want the code to be in C++. And ChatGPT produces the C++ code with perfect syntax. For simple use cases, you'll find that the syntax and logic that ChatGPT or other conversational AI services employ, they are perfect or close to perfect. But as your programming and use case gets more difficult, well, that's when I would be more cautious using code generated by ChatGPT or some other generative AI tool. Let's try this once again. Let's generate code in JavaScript. Whack whack JavaScript indicates the language, and here is the same code in JavaScript. Now you can have your language prompt be more specific. Let's say you want code in Python 3 and you want to ensure it's in Python 3. You can specify Python 3 as a part of your comment. You likely don't need to do this anymore because Python 3 is the de facto standard and that is the Python version that ChatGPT uses for most part. So maybe if you want code in Python 2, you'll have to explicitly specify Python 2. But for Python 3, specifying just Python should be sufficient. The code that I've asked to be generated is a little different. Given a list of elements, can you check to see if a particular item exists in that list? And here is the code that was generated. The code is correct, it does what I wanted it to do, but you can see that the code is standalone, it's not defined within a function. Now, if you want the code to be within a function, you can refine your prompt. You can follow up with ChatGPT and say, can you create a function that performs this check and returns true or false? And it will generate code nicely wrapped within a function that you can invoke. You can see that the function name is meaningful as well. Item exists in list. And you also get an example of how that function can be invoked. Let's code with comments. Here, my prompt is clear but not very specific. Read data from a CSV file and filter out all records where age is less than 20. I don't specify the technology. I don't specify how the file is to be read. Now, ChatGPT could have gone either way, but it chooses pandas for this. It installs pandas, it generates a sample CSV file with records in a certain format, and then it uses pandas to read in the data and perform the filtering. But maybe you didn't want to use pandas. In that case, you have to be more specific with your prompts. Can you please use the CSV reader for this? This is a follow up question, and ChatGPT correctly interprets this. It sets up the CSV file and then uses the CSV reader to perform the same reading and filtering operation. While generating code, I've empirically found that it's far better to specify a concrete set of instructions. Here I've just used the triple quotes and then I have three different steps within the triple quotes. Step 1, create a list of employees who belong to departments. Step 2, create a list of department names and IDs. And step 3, combine them to get a result of 5 employees with departments. These are precise and clear instructions, and you'll likely get good granular step by step code. Now, I haven't specified a programming language, and ChatGPT automatically generates code in Python because we've been working with Python for so long. It's also quite possible that whatever code and commands it generates could be in SQL. My instructions were clear, but I hadn't specified the technology, which is why ChatGPT is free to choose. It picked Python because most of the past interactions here in this conversation were about Python. Chatbots are powered using natural language models, and what we've discovered as we've used them is that they have a natural understanding of code. Now, you can generate code using English statements, that is just prompts describing what you want. We've seen that you can also generate code by specifying your prompts using code comments. You can actually get even more technical with ChatGPT and generate code by providing some starter code. If the starter code is meaningful, generative AI models powering these chatbots will basically just try to complete what you started. Remember, for this, your starter code should not be ambiguous. The starter code should clearly define what you're looking for. Now, I must tell you that I was so excited when I first encountered this feature that I made sure that it worked on ChatGPT and then I checked Bard as well, just to make sure Bard understands code in exactly the same way. And you'll find that it does. Let me show you what I mean with an example. Let's say you want ChatGPT to write the code for some function. If it's a straightforward function that ChatGPT would have understood with a description, and you give the function a meaningful name, and you give ChatGPT some starter code, let's say the function signature, and from the function signature, ChatGPT is able to tell which language you want your function to be coded in. And here it's pretty clear that I'm coding in Python. Well, this is all the prompt that ChatGPT needs to complete the definition of this function. It should be pretty clear what you're looking for from this function. Is prime number? Well, that's a pretty clear instruction to ChatGPT. The fact that I use the def keyword and I specified a colon at the end of the function signature indicates to ChatGPT that the code generated should be in Python. Let's see what ChatGPT has to say, and you can see that it has figured out my intentions perfectly. It even explains things to me. It seems like you want a function is prime number to check whether a number is prime or not. And notice in the function definition in the generated code, is prime number takes in a single input argument. Now, when I had defined my function signature as a part of my prompt, I did not specify the input argument, but ChatGPT still added that in because it made sense. So it's pretty sensible about code this way. You can look at the rest of the code and see that the code is actually correct for prime number determination. And I really appreciate that these chatbots are helpful enough to tell us how exactly the function that they've written up or coded up can be invoked. Now let's see if Bard can do this as well. I've switched over to the tab where I have Bard open and I'm going to give Bard the same starter code prompt. Def is prime number. I don't specify the language. Let's go ahead and submit this, and you can see that Bard has also recognized what I'm trying to do here, and it has generated the right kind of code. The code generated is almost exactly the same code that ChatGPT generated, and you can see an explanation for the code here at the bottom as well. So clearly, ChatGPT can do it and Bard can do it as well. Now, let's go back and give ChatGPT some more starter code. This time, I asked ChatGPT to validate an email address. Notice the structure of my starter code prompt. I have a void, and then I have validate email address, and string email is the input argument, and then I have opened a curly brace. Clearly, this is code in Java. The way the method is defined, the structure of the function, everything points to that. Well, let's see what ChatGPT has to say. My starter code prompt was clear, my intent was clear, and you can see that it has generated code in Java. If you look at the function signature in my prompt, you can see that the return value is void, meaning after validating the email address, the code should not return true or false. It should either throw an exception or do something else. Let's see what ChatGPT has done. Because it's Java, ChatGPT has placed the function that it has coded up inside a class, email validator. The class has a main with a few invocations as well. Notice that ChatGPT has not tried to return anything from the function. It has simply printed out to screen whether the email that you've passed in is valid or not. And then, of course, we have the explanation for the code at the bottom. The code uses regular expressions and the explanation includes that. Now, let's try this once again. Here is another starter code prompt. Notice that the return value is a double. The name of the function calculate distance, and I have point 1 and point 2, and it's very clear from the syntax of point 1 and point 2 that this is code that I want in C++. It seems like this is clear to ChatGPT as well. It tells us very clearly it seems like you want a function in C++, and then it basically sets up the function for us in C++. And you can see that the setup that it's done is pretty thorough. It includes the math library, defines a class point in case we haven't done it, and then of course we have the function for calculate distance. Let's try one last example of code generation using starter code. Here is the function that I want to generate code for, factorial recursive. The fact that I use the function keyword to define the function indicates that this is code in JavaScript that I'm looking for. And I only have the opening brackets, but it completes the rest of the code for me. Observe that it also follows JavaScript best practices and it uses the triple equal to check whether the number is equal to 0 or 1. Another cool thing is it understands recursion. I call the function factorial recursive that actually contained information. Not only do I want the factorial to be computed, I also want it to be done in a recursive manner. And ChatGPT has understood this perfectly. And of course, it has the console log to output the result at the bottom. And now that you've seen how starter code prompts work, you must admit that it's rather cool and fun. It's not just code in different languages, you can also use generative AI tools to generate SQL queries for your different scenarios and use cases. Here is an example of a prompt that you can use to generate a SQL query. By specifying the triple quotes here, I'm using the prompting technique that converts comments into code. I want the output to be in the form of a SQL query, but notice I don't use the term SQL anywhere. But I do say table employees and I specify the columns in the table and I give the instruction find all employees who belong to the operations department. Observe that one of the columns in the table that I have defined is department. Using the term table is what gives a cue to ChatGPT that the data is in the form of a table and the most likely table is a relational database table. And you can see that the SQL query has been generated correctly. It's a simple select from where command, and you can see the explanation for each SQL clause just below the query that was generated. You can generate complex queries as well without specifying type of query that you're looking for. Now, what I have here is a prompt for the join operation. But notice that I don't say join anywhere, I don't even say SQL. But of course, I have two tables, employees and departments. Notice that the employee table has a department ID column and the departments table has an ID column and then a department name. Now, if you look at my instruction, I say find all employees who belong to the operations department. I don't say anything about, oh, the department name is only in the departments table, the employees table only has the department ID. I don't specify any of this. I don't even say anything about joins. But ChatGPT is able to interpret all of this. Observe the query, it has performed an inner join between departments and employees based on the department ID, which is absolutely correct. It's also created aliases for the two tables, departments as D and employees as E. And then, of course, it forms a filtering on the department name. All in all, a very good query, and there is the explanation at the bottom. Now, let's try this once again with a different kind of query that needs to be written. Performing the operation that the prompt instructs requires using a nested subquery. Let's see if ChatGPT is up to the task. I'm still using the generate code using comments prompting technique. I have the employees table and I want to find all employees who have salaries greater than the average employee salary. Now, this requires a nested SQL query. Those who are familiar with SQL realize this. Let's take a look at the query itself. And there is the nested subquery in the where clause where salary greater than and then in brackets select average salary from employees. Pretty cool that ChatGPT realized this. When I've been using the comments as code technique in this video, I haven't been specifying what language I want the results in. Now, based on some cues in the comments that I've specified, ChatGPT has correctly interpreted SQL as the language to use for generation. But really, ChatGPT's interpretation can be wrong, and then you'll spend a lot of time doing annoying back and forth with the chatbot to get the result that you need. One technique is, of course, within the comments, you just say SQL or Java or Python. Another technique is to use leading words to nudge the model towards a particular pattern that you want in the output. Now, I've used comments for code generation again, but notice the last line, I simply say select. The presence of the select clause will indicate to ChatGPT that I want SQL queries, and it will produce SQL queries in the result. Now, this instruction also requires a join operation, but it's different from the previous join. I've said I want to count the number of employees in each department. Now, a department could have 0 employees, and the right way to write this query is using a left join, and really, ChatGPT got this right. Now, I may have the same kind of prompt using comments, but this time I want the code to be generated in Python. In order to ensure that I do get the response in Python, I use a leading word to nudge the model in the right direction. Notice the import at the very bottom. This is my leading word indicating that it's Python code that I'm looking for. Well, this time around when I ran it, ChatGPT did not get it right. But the last few times it did get it right. So remember, prompt engineering is not an exact science. You have to tailor and tweak your prompts till you get the right response that you're looking for. When you work with generative AI tools, it's not just about code generation for the scenarios that you specify, either using comments or using just prompts in plain English. It's also about leveraging generative AI tools to help you with coding in other ways. For example, let's say you're doing a migration project. Originally, the entire project was written in Python, but maybe you're migrating to the Java programming language. Now, this migration is unlikely to be straightforward. I'm sure there's a lot of nitty gritty that you have to take care of. But there might be certain functions that you just have to convert to Java from Python, and that's when you can use generative AI. The techniques that I suggest here will definitely work for simple functions, but they'll also work for fairly complex functions as well. So, those are the things that you need to try out and see whether things work out for you. Now, I have some code in Python and I want to convert to Java. This code takes as input arguments the names and ages of some students and converts this information to be represented in the form of a dictionary where the name is the key and the age is the value. And you can see there is some error checking here in the beginning of the code as well. We initialize a student's dictionary, and here is the for loop that I run over the names to initialize the dictionary. Now let's see what the Java code looks like. You can see that ChatGPT has correctly mapped the dictionary data structure in Python to a hash map in Java, which is great. It's also set up a class within which it's placed the Java code. The class is called Student Dictionary Creator, again, meaningful. And then there is the main function where you actually invoke the create students dictionary function. And if you scroll down below, here is the function itself. You can see that there is some error checking if names length not equal to ages length. That's great. The code then initializes a hash map, which is the right data structure to use corresponding to a dictionary, and then basically sets it up the names and ages of students. So this is a great conversion from Python to Java. Now, you can convert constructs that are available only in Python to Java code as well. For example, list comprehension is something that is available only in Python. There is no Java equivalent, but you can see that our list comprehension code has been correctly converted to Java here. The original code basically filters elements from the original list, so we only have elements greater than 100 in the filtered numbers list. And you can see that ChatGPT correctly tells you here's the equivalent Java code for list comprehension, and it basically writes very long and detailed code to give you the filtered numbers in Java. Now, code conversion works from and to many languages. Here, I'll show you a few examples, but really, ChatGPT understands many languages and you can convert code between all of these. Here, I convert the same student dictionary code to JavaScript, and you can see that ChatGPT will give me accurate results here in JavaScript as well. Now, one thing about getting ChatGPT to convert code or even generate code, make sure you double check your code and you perform your own tests. It's just like you would when you take code from Stack Overflow or from other site which helps you with debugging problems, right? You'll always double check the code. You should do the same with ChatGPT. Here I convert the same code from Python to C++. And once again, ChatGPT is successful. So it's pretty clear that there are a variety of programming languages for which you can use ChatGPT for code conversion and code generation. I won't walk you through all of the generated code, but you can see that ChatGPT has correctly used a vector to represent the input arguments passed in and an unordered map as the equivalent of the dictionary data structure in Python. Now, I don't know if this has happened to you before, but this often happens with me. Now, there is some complex bit of coding I need to do, and I'm not really able to wrap my head around the problem. And then I turn to Stack Overflow or a site like that to help me out. I get some code from that site, it seems to work, but I can't understand what that code is doing. And because I can't understand it, I can't tweak and modify that code for my use case. This is a problem that I've encountered often. Well, now I have generative AI to help me, and you have it too. You can have generative AI tools explain a bit of code to you as well. I have some code here which takes in a list of numbers, picks a number at random from that list, and based on the number selected, it performs one of three operations: returns 0, returns the square, or returns the cube of that number. Now I'm going to ask ChatGPT what this code does. You can see my instruction prompt here at the bottom. Please explain what process random number does. And it produces a very credible response. Now, this particular function was a fairly easy one, but ChatGPT got it perfectly right. So you can use this explanation to kind of wrap your head around what the code does. And then, of course, you can tweak it based on your use case. Let's try this once again. Here is a function called random function. This is in Java. Now, I've purposely not given this function a meaningful name so that I don't give away what that function does to ChatGPT using the name of the function. And then there is some code here that uses the string builder. This function reverses the words in a sentence that you pass in. Now, I've not used the term reverse anywhere in this function, and I've asked ChatGPT, please explain what random function does. Let's see what ChatGPT is able to tell us about this function. You can see here that ChatGPT gives us a line by line explanation for what the code does. But it has also figured out that the code is trying to build a reversed line. The term reversed wasn't there anywhere in my input. In fact, I was really careful about that, but it still figured it out. ChatGPT will explain code to you. It may not be perfect, but it will be enough for you to get started. Another thing that happens with me really often when I'm writing code is that I've written a complex bit of code. There is one small thing that's wrong, but I just can't figure out what it is. I keep trying different inputs, I keep debugging my code, but basically my brain freezes and I'm not able to debug it by myself. Well, now I have my generative AI assistant to help me. ChatGPT, Bard, and other AI tools can all help you with debugging your code as well. Again, I would be very careful with any code or debugging that they do. I would always double check it, but it's very, very helpful because they can quickly get to the point and quickly identify errors that elude you and end up wasting your time, maybe several hours. Here, let's turn to the language model that powers ChatGPT. This is GPT 3.5 on the Open AI playground. And I'm going to ask this model to help me debug this bit of code. What I have here is code that has an infinite loop. I haven't indicated what language the code is in. I've just pasted the code in. It should be able to interpret the language. That's what I thought. And then ask it, why does this code not complete? Well, it doesn't complete because there's an infinite loop. Let's see what GPT 3.5 has to say. And you can see that this model that has been so good about everything we've seen so far essentially has a brain freeze and gives me something which doesn't make any sense. This code does not complete because it's missing the closing parenthesis and the colon for the while loop. Well, I think it's a little confused about the language, so let me send in a clarifying prompt. This code is in Python, and now it comes back and apologizes and gives me an answer which is not perfectly right. Let's just separate the answer into two parts, the text and the code. You can see that ChatGPT is always very apologetic when it gets something wrong, and this GPT 3.5 model, which powers ChatGPT, is also apologetic. But that does not mean it gets things right just because it apologized. It now talks about missing an indentation before the print statement, which is wrong. I did have an indentation, but it gives me the correct code. It adds in the count plus equal to 1, so I no longer have an infinite loop. It got the code part right, it got the explanation part wrong. So it did help me, but it didn't get everything perfectly right. Let's see if Bard can solve this problem. I'm going to switch over to Bard and ask it the exact same question. Why does this code not complete? And Bard gave me a great answer. The code you provided does not complete because the while loop is infinite. Notice that is the very first line. It then gives you an explanation for how you can fix this, and it actually gives you the Python code that fixes this. This answer I found much more useful. Another thing I've done while coding is if something does not work and I've broken my head trying to debug it and still I'm not able to figure out what's going on, I turn to a colleague, or if someone isn't available, I turn to Stack Overflow. I go in and paste my code in there and request somebody to respond. What I did was I scoured around on Stack Overflow for a debugging issue and I simply copied the question over, and I'm now pasting that question into Bard. I have no idea what the code was about or what the person writing the code was trying to use it for. I just got the question, I saw the error in that question, I saw that it had been answered and the error had been fixed a certain way, and I simply copy pasted the entire question. I took the code from the question, and here is what I asked Bard. Running this gives me an unsupported operation exception. Can you tell me why and can you fix this code? I should tell you that the original question had a lot more detail. There was the exact line number where the error occurred, there was the stack trace. I just got rid of all of that. I wanted to see how Bard does with this very plain code and a very simple question. And I must say, I was pleasantly surprised at how accurately Bard pointed out the issue. There is an arrays as list call somewhere in the code, and that essentially creates an unmodifiable array. The programmer was then trying to modify that array, which is what resulted in the unsupported operation exception. And Stack Overflow responders got it right as well, but so did Bard. Bard not only explained the fix to me very, very cogently, but also gives me the completed code, the complete code with the fix included. Very, very useful if you have debugging issues. Now, let's try going to Stack Overflow, and I've identified another debugging issue, and I'll show you how I just copy pasted that question into Bard and got the response. So it's a newbie question about not printing correct values. What I'm going to do is simply copy the entire question over. So I won't worry about actually understanding the question. We'll look at the response and then we'll see whether that makes sense. So let me just copy the entire question over. I've not changed anything here. This is just the question as is. And I'm just going to paste this into Bard and hope that Bard can help me. Now, this last paragraph here, I'm going to get rid of that. This is essentially a question asking for suggestions for programming practice. I don't want Bard to give me suggestions. I want Bard to debug my code. The newbie has set up some bank account class with withdraw and deposit methods. And here, when he calls withdraw, the sum ends up getting added to his bank account instead of being subtracted from his bank account. And that's his problem. And he's pasted a lot of code to help debug and find the solution. And Bard got this right away. The problem is in the withdraw method, and it has to do with the double minus sign. The newbie had specified balance minus minus withdraw, and if you remember your basic mathematics, this ends up being a plus operation, and that's why the amount that the newbie was trying to withdraw was getting added to his balance. In addition to pointing out the mistake, Bard also gives you the correct code. So this is very, very useful. And then, of course, at the bottom, you have the complete code as well. Let's see how this compares with the response the newbie got on Stack Overflow. So I'm going to switch back to Stack Overflow where I got the original question, and let me go down and show you the response that is the right one. And you can see that this refers to the double negative as well and gives the fixed code. So essentially, what the newbie got from Stack Overflow, the newbie could today get using generative AI tools. Let's do this once again. I'm going to go back to Stack Overflow and I found another different question. Again, newbie question, because those are easier for us to understand here for the purposes of this demo. And I'm going to essentially copy this question over and let's see if Bard can solve this newbie's problem. I'm going to just copy the question over verbatim. Now, the problem is this newbie gets some kind of type error while running this Python code. The newbie knows which line causes the error. It's that line with sum of a W, but doesn't understand why that error exists and how to fix it. Let's just ask Bard and see if Bard can fix things for us. And yes, indeed, Bard gets this right. The variable W was obtained by iterating over a for loop. The variable W is an integer, and integer objects are not iterable. And you can see the Python code that Bard suggests the newbie use to actually get the right result. Now, I can tell you upfront that this is indeed correct. What I did was I looked at the code, then I looked at Stack Overflow and saw what the right response was, and Bard got it fixed perfectly. You can see the right response here on Stack Overflow, and this response suggests the exact same fix that Bard did. Now, ChatGPT, Bard, and other generative AI tools can also debug more complex problems. And I suggest you try these out on your own when you're doing your own coding. But my usual caveat applies here, they won't always get things right, so it's better to not rely on them blindly. Now, here I am back on ChatGPT. And as this last part here in my demo, where we write code using generative AI tools, let me show you how ChatGPT or Bard or any other generative AI tool can parse documentation and then write code based on that documentation. Now, in India, there is a very popular trading platform called Zerodha, and Zerodha offers an extensive API that you can use to interact with the stock market here in India. Here, I asked ChatGPT a question to see whether ChatGPT knows anything about Zerodha APIs. And ChatGPT very clearly tells me, I'm sorry, but I can't assist with that request. So ChatGPT has no idea what I'm talking about. Now, let me head over to the Zerodha API documentation. It's here at kite.trade docs connect v3 orders. Keeping in mind ChatGPT's request length limitation, I'm going to copy over this entire documentation till a certain section. So everything up to but not including retrieving orders. Once I've copied this over, I'm going to paste this into ChatGPT and ask a question based on this documentation. So here's my question. Using the documentation on this page, can you write a request in Python to place an order on Zerodha? It's the exact same question as before, but now I have the documentation that ChatGPT can use to actually figure out how to write Python code to do this. Let's go ahead and submit this and see what ChatGPT has to say. ChatGPT servers were overloaded when I recorded this, and it gave me this error and asked me to regenerate the response. And when I regenerated the response, I got something that was close to correct. Now, I can't be 100% sure this is correct. You'll have to actually try it out to see whether it works. But it's actually parsed the documentation and shown you a way you can place an order using the requests API. Now, Bard has access to live documentation. Remember, Bard supports scraping URLs on the web to get content and answer questions based on that content. So I asked Bard to write a request in Python to modify an existing order on Zerodha, and Bard knew exactly what I was talking about. And it gave me code, and I looked at the original documentation. This code seems absolutely correct. So it doesn't matter whether you're working with ChatGPT, Bard, or Bing Chat, they all have the ability to parse documentation and give you the code that you're looking for. In this demo, we'll come back to a topic that we briefly discussed in an earlier course, and that is zero shot and few shot prompting. Now, natural language models, such as the GPT models that we are working with, have the ability to perform tasks that they may not have been explicitly trained for using a single prompt. Because they understand natural language, even though they haven't been trained for a task such as classification, they can perform classification. And this is what zero shot prompting is all about. It refers to the ability of a machine learning model to perform a task without having been explicitly trained for that task. Now, in such scenarios, the model uses its generalized understanding to respond to a prompt or question that it has never encountered before. Zero shot prompting is also referred to as zero shot learning. So, in such a setup, you provide your model with a prompt or instruction that makes your task very clear, and then the model will try and do its best. And in many cases, the model will succeed, as we shall see in some of the examples that follow. Now, all of these prompts that you're going to see for the next few examples are examples of zero shot prompting. We've already seen that natural language models perform very well on sentiment analysis, and for most sentiment analysis tasks, that's essentially a zero shot prompt. For example, I say, what's the sentiment of the review below? And I've pasted in a review here, which I've got from Amazon. Now, I haven't said how it should be classified, what the categories are, and I haven't given any examples, but you can see that the model still gets it right. This is clearly a negative review. Let's perform some more sentiment analysis using zero-shot prompting. What's the sentiment of the review below? And then this is a positive review. Again, it's for the same device that I was looking at on Amazon. And ChatGPT tells me that the sentiment of the review is positive. Let's try one more zero-shot prompt. Classify the sentiment of the review below. And I felt this was a neutral review, but overall its tone is a little negative, and so ChatGPT very firmly believes this is a negative review. Now, you may not always get a good response with zero shot prompting, and that's when you might have to turn your attention to use few shot prompting or few shot learning. The basic characteristic of zero shot prompting is you just ask a question cold with no prior information about anything else in the world, and essentially you get the right response from the model. But sometimes we have to give additional information or a few examples before the model gets things right. Few shot prompting refers to the approach where a model is given a small number of example prompts and the corresponding responses, and these examples are referred to as shots. These examples help the model understand a particular task that it needs to perform and will essentially try to mimic what you've specified in that task. Unlike zero shot learning, where the model is expected to generalize from its pre training to handle a completely new task, in few shot learning, the model is given some context or a few examples or shots that guide the model towards producing the correct response. Now, whatever examples or shots you provide the model, mimic the kind of response you want from the model for whatever it is that you're asking. Now, notice few shot prompting here for sentiment analysis. Notice that I haven't said anything like perform sentiment analysis. All I've done is given a bunch of sentences and the corresponding sentiment. These are all the shots or the examples. So the first one, truly game-changing product, that's highly positive. The second one is positive. I'm happy I went once, but I would not go again. That's meh. You can see here that for every bit of text, I have the sentiment just after it. And then I have the final bit of text, well worth the 2 hours I spent. And then I have sentiment and then colon. I don't need to specify any additional instructions. The examples or the few shots I have provided will let the model know that I want sentiment analysis. And the model tells me that the sentiment for this is positive. Now we've done a bunch of sentiment analysis already, so let's take a look at a slightly different example. First, we'll do zero shot prompting and then we'll do a few shot prompting. Here is an example of zero shot prompting. I'm asking ChatGPT to recommend some classics that I could read. Now, this is zero shot prompting because the model has not been specifically trained to recommend books to me or to anybody. This is a very general question. I've made the question clear enough so that I elicit a decent response. Let's see what ChatGPT has to say. With the zero shot prompt, ChatGPT gives me a whole number of different books that I could read. All of these books are classics and they span genres and span years. Now, I looked through all of these suggestions and I didn't feel like reading any of these books. Then I realized I need to provide some examples to ChatGPT of the kinds of books that I like. This is an example here of few shot prompting. Here are some books from different authors that I have liked in the past. Count of Monte Cristo, Journey to the Center of the Earth, The Moonstone. Having given ChatGPT these few shots or examples, I then asked the same question again. Please recommend some classics that I could read. And this time around, the book recommendations made by ChatGPT are so much better. You can see Treasure Island there, Hound of the Baskervilles, one of my favorites, Around the World in 80 Days, another favorite, and Prisoner of Zenda. The few shots that we provided to guide the model's results greatly improved the quality of those results. Let's take a look at another example. This is an example of zero shot prompting for keyword extraction. We've pasted in some text and asked ChatGPT to extract 5 keywords from the text here. This is zero shot prompting because this is not what the model was specifically trained for. Also, we haven't given any examples of what keyword extraction looks like. We know that ChatGPT excels at this task and it generated 5 relevant keywords from the text. I actually feel ChatGPT did a pretty decent job, but sometimes if you're not happy with the results, you can specify a few shots for ChatGPT to improve its performance. So once again, I want to extract the 5 most important keywords. So I have text 1 and keywords 1, that's my first shot. And then below I have text 2 and keyword 2, that's the second shot. And then I have the text for which I want keywords, text 3, and then I specify keywords 3 to specify the format in which I want the output as well. The shots help ChatGPT know the format of the result, and it gives me the output in the desired format. Let's take another example of few shot learning. Here is a conversation between a parent and a teenager. Now, the only thing I've specified here in this prompt is this conversation, and there's, of course, some tone involved in the conversation. The parent speaks a certain way, the teenager speaks a certain way. Now, the conversation is the only thing that I have as a part of this prompt. I've ended the conversation with teenager colon, indicating that's where ChatGPT should pick up, but I haven't given any additional instructions. Well, ChatGPT, using the few shots that I have provided, will know what it needs to do. At least that's what I hope. Now, let's go ahead and hit submit and take a look. But what ChatGPT did was produce keywords for this conversation. Because of all of the previous context here in this particular session with ChatGPT, it got confused and it started producing keywords instead of completing the conversation. What I'm going to do now is delete this chat and let's pass in the same conversation in a new chat. Click on delete, and without all of the previous context, you can see I'm on a new chat. Let me paste in the same conversation between a parent and a teenager once again, and I end with teenager colon. Let's see if ChatGPT is able to figure this out now. And here in the fresh session, ChatGPT is able to figure things out perfectly and it responds as a teenager. It's now up to me to carry on the conversation as a parent. Let me make another suggestion here. You never leave the house nowadays. You could go outside. And here, I feel that ChatGPT got over enthusiastic and responded as the teenager, and then played the role of the parent as well, and then responded as a teenager yet again. So you can't always be certain that your role play will work perfectly, even with a few shots. Let me respond as the parent. Don't you want to meet your friends in the real world? And then ChatGPT does the same thing once again. Responds as a teenager, then as the parent, and then as the teenager again. With few shot prompting, you could get generative AI to understand new mathematical concepts that you have essentially made up. Here is an example of me doing exactly that. I've created a new mathematical statistic called GRFIS, and I've given ChatGPT a few shots to understand what this mathematical concept is all about. So the GRFIS of the first list is 5.5, GRFIS of the second list is 7, GRFIS of the third list is 301. Before I hit enter, I'll let you in on a secret. GRFIS is nothing but the median of those numbers I've specified in a list. Let's see if ChatGPT is able to figure this out using the examples that I have provided. I haven't used the term median anywhere in my prompt. I've given a few shots to ChatGPT to see whether ChatGPT can figure out what GRFIS is all about. And you can see here that ChatGPT gets things terribly wrong. It tries to figure out how to get the answer from the numbers that I've passed in, but it incorrectly assumes that I've computed the average of the numbers. It's not figured out, it's the median. And then essentially it says GRFIS is the average, and this is how an average is computed. Now, let me tell you that the first time I tried this example, ChatGPT got it right, but somehow it wasn't able to figure it out this time around. Let's see if Bard can do any better. I paste in the exact same query in Bard. This is a new mathematical statistics I've made up, GRFIS. Here are a few examples. These are the few shots that I give the model to understand what GRFIS is all about, and then I hit enter. And Bard gets it right. Based on the examples you have provided, it appears that GRFIS of a list is calculated as follows, and it tells me how to calculate the median of a list of numbers, sorting in ascending order, find the one in the middle. And essentially, it back calculates the 3 examples that I have and confirms that yes, GRFIS is indeed the median of a list. Having provided these few shots for the model to learn, I can now ask it questions like this: what's the GRFIS of this list? It performs the mathematical computation needed and it tells me that the GRFIS is 500, which is absolutely correct. And you can try this once again. Let's give it a list with an even number of elements where it has to find the center element, and it'll compute the Griffiths correctly here as well. Before we call it a day with zero shot and few shot prompting and move on to the next topic in this course, let's look at one more example of few shot prompting. And this example is taken from this research paper here, available on archive.org. Using few shot prompting, we'll train our model to use a new made up word in a sentence. Now, first, we have to give the model an example. A what poo, that's also a made up word, is a small furry animal native to Tanzania. An example of a sentence that uses the word what poo is: we were traveling in Africa and we saw these very cute what poos. Then we give an explanation of the made up word fardaddle. To do a fardaddle means to jump up and down really fast. An example of a sentence that uses the word fardaddle is, and I'm looking to Bard to actually complete this with a meaningful sentence. And Bard does not let me down. The children fardoodled with excitement. The dog fardoodled around the yard chasing its tail. Here we are on ChatGPT once again, ready to dive into a different prompting technique. I'm going to close the sidebar so that we have more room to view the prompts and the corresponding results. In this demo, we'll study how chain of thought prompting works. At its core, chain of thought prompting is about guiding the large language model to think in a step by step fashion. This is achieved by providing the model with a few short examples that outlines the reasoning process. The model is then expected to follow a similar chain of thought when answering the prompt. I've mentioned before that earlier generations of large language models were not very good at mathematical reasoning. And if instead of just asking the mathematical problem and asking the model to reason it through itself, you could actually provide a chain of thought or a chain of steps for the model to follow, and the model often perform better in such situations. But I've noticed that the models that we are working with today automatically follow chain of thought and give you step by step processes for any action that they perform. Now, I'll first show you a prompt where I do not use chain of thought prompting, and then I'll switch over to one where I do use chain of thought. Here, I just have a simple prompt with customers and orders data. Can you give me the average order price for each customer who has more than 3 orders? So I've just kind of written out what I want in English. With not much to go on, ChatGPT generates a SQL query to perform the task that I just prompted for. The prompt was vague, and of course, the results are also not very clear. I did not really want a SQL query, and I don't have all of the intermediate steps that I was looking for. Well, it was completely my fault. I should have used chain of thought prompting. Chain of thought prompting is especially useful if you want to ensure that the individual steps in the response that the model gives is to your liking, is what you want. Here is an example of chain of thought prompting for the same question I asked before. So I have the instruction at the top here: using Python and pandas, can you do the following with step-by-step instructions and code? And then 1, install the pandas library. 2, read 2 CSV files called customers and orders. And then I have step 3, combine the files to form a resulting data frame. Then 4, find the customers who have more than 3 orders and compute the average order price for these customers. Using chain of thought prompting, I ensure that the response I get is very step by step. You can see the response here. For every step that I have added to the prompt, I get one step in the response with the code as well as the explanation. This makes it very easy for me to use this code directly because I've been very explicit about what I wanted, and that means that I got exactly what I wanted here in the result. If you have a complex math or logical reasoning problem and you feel that ChatGPT is not able to help you with the answer, or any generative AI tool is not able to help you with the answer, well, use chain of thought prompting. Break down the problem into individual steps and have the model give you the response using these individual steps. Now, let's say you're starting a new project and you're figuring out whether you should be using Java or Python. You could craft a simple open ended prompt like this one, which is better, Java or Python. And of course, ChatGPT will give you a detailed response. And the detailed response is pretty step by step. It'll give you different points that you have to consider, and then it'll kind of summarize these points at the very end. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the response that we have here, and in fact, in most cases, this is perfect. But what if you're stuck on some specific aspects of choosing between Java and Python? You have some specific use cases and you want to ensure that ChatGPT has considered all of these. Well, this is where chain of thought prompting can really help you. Notice how I've changed my prompt here. Compare Java and Python, keeping the following points in mind, and tell me which one would be better for my team to use. Step 1. Consider the learning curve as my team is mainly made up of junior programmers. Account for the fact that we use SQL. We need high performance and ease of maintenance. Let's scroll down. I have a few more steps. Generate strengths and weaknesses of each language and make the final decision based on this criteria. Now let's see what the model has to say. I won't read through the entire response, I'll leave that to you. But notice that each step that you had specified in the prompt is addressed separately. This allows you to actually look at the response and use it directly because these are all steps that you specified as a part of your prompt. And then at the very end, it gives you its final decision. It supports a hybrid approach. Well, that's definitely a bit of a cop out, but ultimately the decision is up to you for something as important as this. I've mentioned earlier that some of the other models, especially the legacy completions model, often do not perform well at math. But chain of thought prompting can actually improve their math performance. And let me show you an example of exactly this. If you look on the right hand side, you can see the mode I'm currently in the OpenAI playground is the legacy completions API. The model that I'm using is the Text DaVinci 003 model. Now I have my prompt here, which is just a mathematical word problem. The cafeteria had 23 apples. If they used 20 to make lunch and bought 6 more, how many apples do they have? Now, if you hit submit, you'll see that the model actually gets the right answer. They have 9 apples, but it does not show any working, doesn't give you explanations for why the answer is 9, and really, it doesn't always give you the right answer either. It happened to at this point in time, but it's very possible that it just won't give you the right answer. But with chain of thought prompting, you can get the intermediate steps and you're more likely to get the right answer. Let's switch to that. Observe my step by step instructions. Please start with the original number of apples. Consider only the apples used to make lunch and compute how many left. Consider the newly bought apples and then compute how many left. This will actually give you the working for the problem, and chain of thought prompting allows you to verify that the resulting answer of 9 apples is indeed correct. In fact, chain of thought prompting can be as simple as specifying an additional line in your prompt. Let's think step by step. And even just adding this line will cause the model to show you working and think through the reasoning process step by step, and you're more likely to get the right answer. If you're working with a newer model such as the GPT 3.5 for simple mathematical reasoning problems, you don't need to say let's think step by step or use chain of thought prompting. Here is the original prompt, and without you specifying anything beyond this, you can see the response is automatically step by step. The response automatically uses chain of thought. In this demo, we'll work with what's called generated knowledge prompting or augmented knowledge prompting. Now, the term actually describes what the prompt is about. You augment the knowledge of the model with some additional information that's relevant to your business or your use case, and then the model will try and use that information to respond to your prompts. This generated knowledge or augmented knowledge is knowledge that the model did not have before. This can be knowledge that's specific to your organization. For example, if you're building a chatbot for your organization, you might want to train your model with some augmented knowledge, and then this augmented knowledge will be used by the model to respond to queries within the chatbot app that you have created. Here is a simple example of how you can set up augmented knowledge prompting. Now, I have this entire scenario drawn up here. Consider that you're an assistant at a computer science tutoring center. So, I want the model to act as a chatbot in a computer science tutoring center. Now, the objective of the chatbot is to help students who log in with their queries to find the right teacher to help them out. So, students will message into the chatbot and describe the problems that they have, and the chatbot will try and assign the right tutor to actually help the student. I have a series of steps that the chatbot should follow in order to direct the students. Let's look at each of these steps in turn. Step one is ask the student for what the problem is. The student might log in with a hi or a hello, and the chatbot should ask the student and try and gauge what the problem is so that the right teacher can be assigned. The chatbot should then identify the topic of the problem and see whether the problem belongs to any of these categories. So, here are all of the subjects that are taught in that tutoring class: Java programming, Python programming, C, SQL, ML, GCP, AWS, Azure, and data science and analytics. Once the right category for the problem has been assigned, then we go on to step three for the chatbot. The chatbot should then try and identify the topic area and assign the right teacher to help solve the problem. Now, different teachers deal with different topic areas. You can see the list here. For Java programming, there are three teachers: Alice, Mary, and Bob. For SQL, there are two teachers: John and Jane. For machine learning, we have Ramesh, Sudha, and Ji Yang. For AWS, we have Jasmine and Raj. Now, remember, these teachers can only help with their own problem areas. So, you can't assign a student who has a Python problem to John. Once the right teacher has been assigned, then we go to step four. If the student asks for a teacher explicitly, check to see whether the teacher teaches that particular area. If not, please let the student know. So, if the student asks for their favorite teacher, but they are not teachers for that particular area, well, the student should know that. If the teacher does indeed teach that subject, then we'll assign the student to that teacher. And then finally, step five, the chatbot should wish the student luck on his or her learning journey. Now, this is the prompt that I'm going to copy over. So it's a huge prompt because there's a lot of information I wish to convey to the chatbot. So let's switch over to ChatGPT and paste this prompt in. We've already seen all of the details of this prompt. Now it's for us to see whether ChatGPT is able to follow all of the augmented knowledge and directions that we've given here in this prompt. ChatGPT gets back to me with a query: I can help you. Please provide me with the problem or topic you'd like assistance with. Remember, this was step one. I have a problem with my code. Could you help me? Let's see what my chatbot assistant gets back with. I'd be happy to help. Can you specify the programming language or topic? This will help me direct you to the right teacher. And then maybe the student comes back with something like this: I'm trying to code in Python. Let's see if the model understands this. Great, you're looking for help with Python programming. You can see that it's now trying to identify a Python teacher, and it comes up with two options: Christine and Richard. And yes, both of them are Python teachers. You can double check your prompt to see whether this is indeed true. I did do that, and yes, indeed, Christine and Richard do teach Python. But maybe the student has a favorite teacher. I would like to talk to Kasha, but Kasha doesn't teach Python. Let's see if the chatbot gets that. And it does. The chatbot comes back with: I apologize for the inconvenience, but Kasha specializes on the GCP and not Python programming. And then the bot requests me to choose one of the Python programming teachers because they'd be the right one to help me. And now maybe the student responds with something like, got it, please assign me to Christine. And then the chatbot's work is done. And the chatbot correctly wishes me on my learning journey and then directs me to Christine. This was fun. Let's try this once again. I'm trying to upload a file to the cloud, but I'm having some trouble. Could you help me? You can see that the chatbot correctly identifies that I'm having trouble on the cloud, and it tries to pick the right topic area. It narrows down to GCP, AWS, and Azure cloud platform, and then asks me for which cloud platform I'm using. This is quite cool. Now, let's say I'm a really clueless student and I say, I'm not sure. How would I tell what cloud platform I'm running? The chatbot is quite patient with me. I'm glad. Let's try figure it out. So, what service or platform are you using? What URL are you looking at? What website is it? It's trying to get information from me. So, let's get back with something that's not just, oh, this is the cloud platform. The service says S3. Let's see if the bot is able to identify this. And it does. It says, oh, S3 is on AWS. It correctly figures out that S3 is simple storage service on Amazon, and then it specifies what teachers I can talk to, Jasmine or Raj. Maybe this student has a favorite teacher as well. Can't Ramesh help me? That's my response to the bot. Let's see what the bot says. No, Ramesh specializes in machine learning, not AWS. And the bot recommends Jasmine or Raj, so I'll say, oh, sure, please assign me to any of them. And the bot picks one of them and assigns me to Jasmine and wishes me luck. Observe that I don't have to specify the topic area explicitly, and in many cases, ChatGPT is able to identify the topic area I'm talking about. Let's try this once again. My prompt says I'm having some trouble with my random forest algorithm. Can you help me with this? Now, random forest is a machine learning model, and ChatGPT identifies this. You can see that identifying topic area, it finds machine learning and then it finds the machine learning teacher. This can be one of Ramesh, Sudha, or Ji Yang. Well, the student understands and has no particular preference. So let me respond and say, please assign me to any of them. And you can see that the bot assigns me to Ramesh. The model had no idea about this computer science tutoring center or any of its teachers, but by augmenting the knowledge of the model, we were able to set up a nice chatbot to integrate with any app that we might want to build for this tutoring center. We've now reached the end of this course, Case Studies in Prompt Engineering. And indeed, we've gotten to the end of this learning path as well. We started this course off by generating data using prompts. Dummy data is often required during development and testing. Previously, a solution would be to synthesize it manually or with, say, Excel formulas. However, this can be cumbersome when the dataset required is large and complex. With the advent of generative AI, one can simply turn to ChatGPT or Google Bard to synthesize such data. We learned how to use data generation prompts, noting along the way that one can request data in any format, even embedded in SQL queries for easy insertion into SQL tables. Next, we explored how to use code generation prompts. Generative AI tools are remarkably capable at writing code. We explored how to use starter code prompts where you provide a stub piece of code like a function signature and the model will complete your code for you, assuming, of course, that your stub accurately describes what you want to achieve. We also learned how to convert code from one programming language to another, as well as how to prompt models to explain a piece of code. We then saw how we could get generative AI models to debug the error in a code snippet before using it to generate code based on documentation. Finally, we explored some techniques to improve prompt performance. A standalone prompt without any prior context is known as a zero shot prompt. For instance, if you ask ChatGPT to classify the sentiment of some text as positive or negative without any samples, ChatGPT will be able to respond based on its prior knowledge of sentiment. However, if you give it a few sentences with the right classifications, ChatGPT can use those as training data and give better results. This is known as few shot prompting. We also learned how to use chain of thought prompting. This is where you give the model a step by step breakdown of how it should arrive at an answer rather than just answer a direct question. To round off the course, we performed augmented knowledge prompting, where you provide the model with some background context specific to your case, and that is what the model uses to tailor its response. In conclusion, this course has provided us with a good understanding of how prompt engineering can be used to make the most of generative AI tools such as ChatGPT, Google Bard, and Bing Chat. That's it from me here today. Thank you for listening.